Tonight is such a special event. We so appreciate this conversation happening during the campaign season, when our featured author, Margaret Kimberley, discusses her new book, Prejudential: Black America and the Presidents. Margaret Kimberley is also a contributor to the anthology In Defense of Julian Assange, published in October 2019. She is an editor and senior columnist at Black Agenda Report, which she co-founded in 2006 with Glen Ford and the late Bruce Dixon. Tonight, if you have a question for our author, I ask you to hit the Q&A button and make sure to mention your name and the name of your hometown bookstore. I'll ask her your questions toward the end of our broadcast. Well, welcome, Margaret. I'm so looking forward to learning more about Prejudential.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. This has been such a strange time. My book was published in February 4th, about 6 weeks before everything shut down. So I did manage to get in some in-person events, a few, before that was no longer possible. So I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to people in other parts of the country and to talk about my book, and of course to encourage them to bookstores to carry it and readers to buy it. And it's very funny. The publication date was very auspicious, shall we say. February is Black History Month, and it's President's Day month, and it's a presidential election year. So it all came together. Prejudential is a project I began about 4 years ago. I wrote a column in Black Agenda Report about Theodore Roosevelt. And I was encouraged by a friend and supporter to write about all of the presidents. And so not knowing, frankly, what I was getting myself into, I bit off perhaps more than I could chew, but ended up with a book of 45 chapters, one for each president of the United States, analyzing that person's treatment of and relationship with Black people at that time. And as you will soon hear, it's a story of disappointment, of cruelty, disappointment up until the present day. But at any rate, I will begin close to the beginning. It's so hard to decide which presidents to cover, but we'll see what happens. Hold on, here we go. I'm starting with one of the early presidents, Thomas Jefferson. He was like a lot of the early presidents. 10 of the first 12 presidents were slaveholders. And Virginia was a very powerful state. So Jefferson was very typical of wealthy people, of influential people of that time. He owned a couple of hundred people on his plantation at Monticello. And he presents some challenges for us because I was always told about how brilliant he was, and he spoke French, and the Library of Congress began with the books in his collection, which is true, and that he founded UVA, and that he was this erudite man. But he participated in this very cruel industry for his entire life, even though he was a hypocrite too. He would claim that he knew slavery was wrong, but he wasn't sure how to get rid of it. His famous quote, "It was like having a wolf by the ears. You wouldn't dare let him go." But I think it's important to point out, because too often people like Jefferson are given a pass, and we're told, well, he was a man of his times, and that's what everybody did, and we can't judge him by our standards. But there were people at the time who questioned this practice. There's a man named, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Tadayush Kosciusko. He was from Poland. and he fought with the United States in the Revolutionary War. Kosciusko was a slaveholder himself, but he began to question it. And he slowly but surely, he freed the people he owned. And he often discussed the issue of slavery with Jefferson, and Jefferson would, being, you know, the man that he was, claim he didn't like it, but he would use money as excuse, but I'm broke. And Kosciusko actually left money in his will to help Jefferson do what he claimed he wanted to do. He said, and I'll read a few sentences. He said, quote, "I beg Mr. Jefferson that in the case I should die without will or testament, he should buy out my money, buy out of my money many Negroes and free them." And then 18 years later, he wrote a second will and made his wishes even clearer. "I do hereby declare and direct that I should make no other testamentary disposition of my property in the United States. I hereby authorize my friend Thomas Jefferson to employ the whole thereof in purchasing Negroes from among his own or any others." And to cut to the chase, it's a long, complicated story, but Jefferson never made good on what Kosciusko offered to him, and proving to me the fact that he was a terrible hypocrite. So the next president is, I'm going to talk about, sorry about this. There we go. Madison. Like Jefferson, Virginian, wealthy family, owned many people. He also claimed that he thought slavery was wrong, yet never freed anyone in his lifetime. His will called for his enslaved people to be freed upon his death, but his wife, Dolly, didn't do that. She sold them. But I also, I want to talk about somebody else. Well, before I get there, this is a painting, and I put this in the presentation because these people are have been absolved. So many scholars and historians lie on their behalf. And this is a painting done during that era. The artist is unknown. It's called Virginian Luxuries, and it needs very little explanation. It explains the cruelty and the exploitation, the physical exploitation of men and women by these people. So that when people want to try to explain away what they did, I think it's important to see what this artist saw that was so clear. This is a painting from, it's from the State House in Illinois. And it's a scene showing a man named Edward Coles. I believe he's the person here. Edward Coles was a cousin of Dolly Madison. He was a secretary to both Jefferson and Madison. And he was also a slaveholder who began to question. And so he, after many years of planning, he took his enslaved people to Illinois and freed them there and helped them establish themselves as farmers. He ended up becoming a governor of the state of Illinois. So I raise this issue again so that people, we can raise our expectations and not try to explain away what these people did. Now I'm skipping ahead to James Buchanan, more obscure president. He was the Abraham Lincoln's immediate predecessor, a Northerner, but a Democrat, and things have been switched on their heads. It was the Republican Party. Lincoln was the first Republican that was founded in order to stop the spread of slavery. The Democrats were the party of the slaveholding interests. And Buchanan became president a few weeks before the Supreme Court case of, about the freedom of Dred Scott. Scott was an enslaved man who, the man who owned him was an army physician who took him from Missouri to free states. And he went to court and argued that he should have been freed. Buchanan is important because he played a role in doing something deeply unethical. He actually colluded. He communicated with the Supreme Court. It was clear that they were going to rule against Scott and say that he was not a free man. But Buchanan wanted the decision to go farther. So that, as Justice Taney famously said, not only was Dred Scott not free, but no Black person had rights. No Black person had citizenship rights, whether enslaved or free. And Buchanan hoped that by colluding with the court to reach this broad decision, that the issue of abolition, the issue that was breaking up the country, would disappear. And so I think it's important to talk about the role that many of these presidents did, doing things that were terribly wrong. The judiciary is supposed to be independent of the executive branch, but instead Buchanan helped to orchestrate the Dred Scott decision. And this is a cartoon at the time showing him catching an enslaved person attempting to escape. Buchanan, as I just said, was succeeded by Abraham Lincoln, a very, very problematic figure, the president, very much beloved. Even today, he was president during the Civil War, only during the Civil War, and was assassinated shortly after the war ended. And he's thought of as the great liberator. He is the president, it is true, who was determined to keep the Union together. But we also have to talk about the full picture of Lincoln. He tied emancipation to colonization, and he was not the first president to advocate colonization, that is to say, sending Black people out of the country. Some of those schemes succeeded. The African nation of Liberia was settled by newly freed people in the United States. The capital is still called Monrovia, named after President Monroe. Lincoln was an advocate until the end. It is not true that he changed his mind. And there actually, he had an office of colonization. And actually there was a short-lived colony in Haiti, a place called Ile La Vache, Cow Island, off the coast of Haiti, and several hundred people were sent there. The settlement did not succeed. They were not well provisioned. There was illness, there was death, and they were brought back to the United States. He signed this order establishing this colony the day before he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. He always tied the two together. As late as a couple of weeks before he was assassinated, he asked the former General Benjamin Butler to develop a plan to take Black people out of the United States. He wanted this to be an all-white country. Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican president in the early 20th century. He's an interesting person. As I said, it was writing about him which led me to write the whole book. Very much the imperialist, open white supremacist, but he also had that, I don't know, noblesse oblige streak. And he did something interesting. He invited Booker T. Washington to dinner at the White House. And there was a firestorm of condemnation, mostly from the South, but not entirely, that a Black man was invited to dinner at the White House. It was feared that by having done so, he had put segregation and Jim Crow at risk. He quickly backtracked. He said, well, you know, first they said it wasn't really dinner, it was just lunch, and he didn't stay long, and Mrs. Roosevelt didn't join them. And it's very interesting, before this happened, the White House was not called officially the White House. It was called the Executive Mansion. The President's House was known by several names, but Roosevelt officially declared that it would be called the White House in the midst of this storm of controversy. Also, Roosevelt did something quite terrible. A group of Black soldiers were stationed in Brownsville, Texas. They were harassed from the moment their unit arrived. And there was an incident where there was gunfire. They were accused of killing a local person. And Roosevelt waited until after Election Day to court-martial all these men, to kick them out of the military. And at that time, Black people were still Republicans. So he waited till after Election Day, got Black votes in this congressional election, and then undertook that very unjust decision regarding the soldiers in Brownsville, Texas. Then I'm going to skip ahead to another Roosevelt, Franklin. FDR, one of, I'd say also one of the most beloved presidents, especially by Black people. People of my parents' generation loved both Franklin Roosevelt and his wife, Eleanor. But the reality of his relations with Black people is quite different. As a Democrat, he was dependent upon the Southern segregationists. He did not do a lot about civil rights, despite the New Deal legislation, which obviously benefited the whole country. But when he was asked to pass anti-lynching legislation, he always said, "Oh, my hands are tied. I can't. I have to have the support of Southerners." And Thurgood Marshall, who later became the first Black Supreme Court Justice, related a story in his biography where he spoke to Mr. Biddle, the Attorney General, about a particular civil rights case, and he was on the other line when Biddle called the president, and Roosevelt exploded in rage. He overheard the conversation, and he said, "I don't want to hear any more about Eleanor's N-words, and if you bring this up again, I'm going to fire you." So that was Roosevelt, but Eleanor Roosevelt was often the face of civil rights, or more of a veneer of civil rights, frankly. She had a close friendship with Mary McLeod Bethune, the great educator, college president. And this was very unusual at a time when segregation was accepted and quite legal. And it's the sort of thing, it was more cosmetic, however. And the only time Roosevelt actually took any action was when A. Philip Randolph threatened a march on Washington, and he then signed some rather tepid legislation regarding equal employment in defense industries. It's followed by Harry Truman. Harry Truman was from Missouri. As a young man, he was a member of the Klan. It's interesting now, everyone's talking about fascism. Well, there was fascism throughout American history during the era of Jim Crow. The Klan marched past the White House in the 20s. Now, Truman later, when it was revealed he'd been a Klansman as a young man, he made up this story about how he was forced into it, his life was threatened. But he was just a segregationist from a family of slaveholders in Missouri. And he had a famous confrontation with Paul Robeson, the great entertainer and activist. In the late 40s, Robeson led a group of people to a White House meeting demanding that Truman do something about pass an anti-lynching law. Truman, like Roosevelt, said, "I'd like to, I can't," and Robeson came at him. He told him off. Truman got mad and stormed out of the meeting, and shortly thereafter, Robeson was targeted because he was a leftist. because he was a communist, he would not answer that question when he went before HUAC, but he was. And he was persecuted. They took his passport, ruined his career. But that is activism he undertook his entire life, and he even did so in the White House with the president. I'm going to go a little further ahead to Bill Clinton. This is Bill Clinton during his 1992 presidential campaign. And this was a photo opportunity at Stone Mountain, Georgia. It can be, if there's a place that can be called the headquarters of the KKK, it's Stone Mountain. There's a huge sculpture depicting Confederate generals. And these men behind him are prisoners. And Bill Clinton, who was beloved by Black people just because he was a Democrat, actually had this campaign event proving that he was tough on crime by posing with these men as a backdrop. There was the Sister Souljah moment. There was his execution of a mentally disabled Black man in Arkansas. So this is what Black people, the choices we've been given over the years, people who are said to be friendlier to us than they actually are. And the next most beloved president is Barack Obama, for obvious reasons, being the first Black president for real. There were people who called Clinton the first Black president, so odd to think of that now. But Obama did what other politicians did. He, in order to get buy-in from white voters, when he spoke about Black people, it was often with great disrespect, making comments about Black men being irresponsible, making it clear he was not going to be Black people's president. He had to be everybody's president. And despite the love that he received, despite the fact that people came out in droves to vote for him, he did not do anything that Black people needed a president to do. He did not even go through the motions. So aside from being happy to see him, he did what other presidents do, bailed out the banks, not the people, destroyed Libya, the most prosperous country in Africa, got their leader killed. Those are the sorts of things that Obama did. So we got a president who looked like us, but who lived up to the legacy of his all his predecessors. So I think my time is up. I could go on and on. It's so hard to know where to stop. And so now we have Donald Trump, the first president of the modern era who openly appealed to racism, and I believe won the presidency because of it, and I believe could do so again. So this happiness was followed by the despair of Donald Trump. But Trump won because the Democrats did not live up to, I believe the Democratic Party has been living off of a reputation that it has not deserved for many decades. And when they needed people to come out, they didn't get it. And Trump squeaked through a victory in the Electoral College, which, by the way, Democrats have not condemned or said anything about getting rid of. So, and now it's re-election election season. Trump is running for re-election against Obama's Vice President, Joe Biden, who's running rather a lackluster campaign. I think I'm being kind. Yesterday I saw a Time magazine article, people should look it up, about Michigan, one of those states that flipped from Democrat to Republican, and Biden is hoping to win with a nearly invisible campaign, depending on a digital campaign instead of the old-fashioned, tried and true way of getting votes. So at the end of presidents who actually owned Black people, we have a president who won because he's openly bigoted against Black people and other non-white people, who has a good chance of winning again, sadly. So thank you very much. I think that's about all the time I'm going to use. And I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you so much. We hosted Reverend Al Sharpton on Tuesday for his book, Rise Up, Confronting a Country at the Crossroads. And he said that no matter who is elected president, he's going to hold them accountable because of all the promises that are made during campaigns and how what happens after the election, what you implied with President Obama, is so critical. And I just wondered what you saw as effective ways to hold presidents accountable. What are some work that can be done?
Well, the time to hold them accountable is now during a campaign. I think Sharpton and others, he's a questionable character. We could go on about him, but Sharpton, Obama, he worked with Obama to get buy-in. He has an undeserved reputation as a radical, which is obviously not true. But so he became the face of the Obama administration for Black people. But he's not telling the truth. If he really felt that way, he would be making demands now. The time to hold feet to the fire and hope to push people left is when they're still running. Instead of saying vote blue no matter who and we don't have a choice and you have to support Biden, I think people should be telling Biden, I don't think I'm going to vote for you, or I'm not sure if I'm going to vote for you. That is what works. I mean, they can still lie and do what they want when they get into office, but this idea of holding people accountable once they're in and they don't care is just absurd. And I think the fact that Sharpton is peddling that shows you what a scoundrel he is. You can tell I don't have a high opinion of him.
One of our viewers asks if there was in your research any president that did help with race relations.
It's all relative. I think the important thing to know is that the presidents who were best were the ones who faced mass movements. So for example, Lyndon Johnson gets credit, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, but that's because of a mass movement that went on for years. People want to fetishize the civil rights movement, but I think we have to talk about what people did at that time, how they pushed the political process. They understood that they had an adversarial relationship with politicians. But they persisted and they made demands knowing that Johnson and other politicians didn't want to meet them, but they didn't care. And I think that shows us how to make politicians accountable. You have to create a crisis in the system. And by that, I mean force politicians to do things they don't want to do. That forces them to go from saying, no, I can't do that, to realizing that they have to do that. And so I think that's what we should talk more about, is what the people do to push the presidents instead of praising the presidents.
Mm-hmm. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and our local government just unanimously voted to approve a reparations resolution for Black residents. And the resolution does not mandate cash payments to descendants of slaves. Instead, the city plans to make investments in areas where Black residents face disparities. And so I wondered what you think of the possibility of reparations on a wider level, and what could that be like?
Well, I'm in favor of reparations. I think many people, 90% of Black people are, and many other people see the justice in doing that. Reparations are it's an international issue. It is every people has a right to seek repair for damage done to them as a group. And I think we need to have that international perspective. So what should it mean, though? Unfortunately, there has not been a consensus among Black people about what it should mean. It could be money. I happen to believe that that repair can best come about by building a better, more generous society for everyone. I think, for example, getting rid of student loan debt. Black people are terribly burdened by, many people are, by student loan debt. Forgive it, just do it. Free healthcare for all, like most other countries that Americans like to compare themselves to, that, you know, when we call ourselves advanced. Making good on all of the promises of the Civil Rights Act. There's still a lot of discrimination, job discrimination, housing discrimination. So I think all of these are things that would improve life for Black people, improve the country overall, getting rid of mass incarceration. You know, someone asked me to write a retrospective about King 50 years after, a couple years ago, after his assassination. When King was alive, there were 600,000 people incarcerated in the country. And now there's 2.2 million, and half of them are Black. So rather than let people think they're going to get a stimulus check, I think repair has to be something more systemic. And half those people could get out of jail. Most of them are not in jail for committing violent offenses. It was the war on drugs, which Bill Clinton promoted with the help of Joe Biden, who brags about the 90s crime bill. I wrote the damn bill, he said. So those things have to be undone. I believe reparations can be seen that way. I don't know what Asheville is going to do. We have to be careful in this moment because we see things like the city council in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed by the police. They start out voting to get rid of their police department or change it. Well, to make a long story short, it's a name change. That's it. That's all. The mayor wouldn't sign on. There's no change to policing in that city. So I hope Asheville is serious about those disparities that you mentioned. It would be interesting to see. There are a number of ways to approach reparations, but it has to come with honesty about our country, which was founded on genocide, on enslavement, and to have that reckoning and to be intentional about doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Where are you putting your energy these days as a writer and activist?
So many things. You know, as you know, I write my column. It's a lot. I have a day job. I just have to say that, you know, writers have to have day jobs until I retire. I won't be able to write full time, but I write my column. I'm very much interested in international issues. I'm very concerned about what the Trump administration is doing internationally. Some of it is new, some of it is not. Most of these presidents build on what their predecessors did. This attack on China, this hybrid war on China and other countries, it's very, very dangerous. So I'm participating in a webinar next week with a group called No Cold War. And people can find out what I'm up to on Twitter. Freedom Ride Blog is my Twitter handle. And so people can find out what I'm doing. I'm very active with the Black Alliance for Peace. And we are organizing to make sure that this emergence, this seemingly spontaneous protest that started earlier this year, a few months ago, that it's something that is real, and that people talk about the connections between the domestic and the international. People act like foreign policy is some kind of a frill. Even Bernie Sanders, who was progressive, his foreign policy positions were pretty much the imperialist positions of other Democrats and Republicans. But you can't have, for example, military spending eat up 60% of the budget and expect people to have decent lives. It is literally why we can't have nice things in this country. And Black Alliance for Peace, blackallianceforpeace.com, we are working to organize, to educate people to bring about those changes that we need to have a just country and a just world.
I don't think you'll have time to address this question from viewers totally, but they asked about your assessment of Jimmy Carter, John Kennedy, and the Bushes.
Well, you know, John Kennedy, he was like other Democrats at the time, depending on the segregationist South for political support. He was the first one pushed by the civil rights movement. He and his brother, they did not support the Freedom Riders. They were very much against it. Bobby Kennedy hated the March on Washington. He felt it was something that was going to be used against his brother, went along with J. Edgar Hoover in surveilling Martin Luther King and others. But he was proposing civil rights legislation at the end of his life. And then, of course, he's assassinated and martyred. And, you know, in the 60s and early 70s, it was very common to see in Black people's homes a picture of both Kennedys and Martin Luther King together. They didn't belong with him. I'll just put it that way. Jimmy Carter was a Southerner. During his campaign in the 70s, school busing for integration was the hot issue. He was opposed to busing. He made comments about alien mixing in neighborhoods. I'm butchering it now, sorry about that. But basically he was saying that segregation was okay. And he was a very conservative Democrat. But he was a Democrat, and by that time the switch had taken place. Black people were solidly Democratic, and so he and others like him, unfortunately, were given a lot more credit than they deserved.
Another viewer asks what your thoughts are on the debates regarding statues and other shrines to slaveholders.
Well, I think it's positive that people are taking them down. I really do. You know, in writing this book, I realized the extent to which we are lied to by scholars and historians. The information I put in this book, it's not hidden. It's not in a secret archive. Anybody who's interested in this, if you research Abraham Lincoln, you pretty quickly, you see that his goal was sending Black people out of the country, but nobody talks about it. And we have been told to, you know, they were a product of their time, as I said before. I think it's a great thing that people are questioning what we've been taught and wanting to take down these monuments. Now, where does it go? Do you just take the monument down? Do you put it in a museum? I think that's open for a debate, but I think it is a very good thing that there are many people who are not going along with these narratives that we've been taught our whole lives.
Well, another viewer asks, where do you find hope?
Hope is in the people. I think we have to be, we're at a precipice in this country. We've been talking about those terrible wildfires in the West caused by climate change, the fact that there are these very high temperatures and these droughts that created this catastrophe. COVID-19 has exposed all the inequities in our society, that we live in a failed state that can't provide for its people. But we have to go back and look at what people did in the 60s and early 70s. We have an Environmental Protection Agency because people were out, millions of people protested about environmental degradation, and a Republican president, in response to that pressure, signed the bill which authorized the creation of the EPA. It's with us. We are the ones we've been waiting for. It's such a cliche, but it's true. So that's where my hope is. My hope is that people will learn their history. People are often resistant to hearing the things that I've written about and I've spoken about tonight. People want to be positive about their country, want to have heroes. I say pick better heroes. If there's a white man from the 1800s you want to admire, I say pick John Brown. So I am hopeful, but it's going to take serious organizing. serious analysis of what has worked in the past, but it's on us to change things. And whether Trump wins or Biden wins, people must make demands about the kind of lives that we ought to have and about how our country behaves around the world. So that's where my hope is.
Okay. Well, I think we should leave it there on that note. Thank you so much, Margaret, for being here tonight and giving us all this information. And I hope those viewing, if you want to purchase her book, you purchase it at the independent bookstore that brought you here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I don't even, when people ask me where to buy the book, I do not mention the river with the letter A. How you describe I send people to bookshop.org. I tell everybody, anytime I have an event with an independent bookstore, I think it's vital for obvious reasons. So buy the book, buy it from your local bookstore.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was great. It was fun.